My broadcast is loading live soon. The broadcast has started and I am now live. Good morning, good morning. Welcome everyone to Introduced by Technically, part of Philly Tech Week presented by Comcast NBC Universal. I'm Vincent Better, the Vice President of Sales and Marketing with Technically Media. For the rookies, this is Technically's annual day-long conference sharing ideas, people, and opportunities that build better companies. Today is for you, the company and culture builders, the entrepreneurs, business leaders in HR and people ops professionals. Thank you for joining us. And thank you for participating in yet another virtual event. It will be refreshing to see your non-digital faces as we plan to return to in-person next year. A few things about the navigation of the platform. As you see on the event agenda page, there'll be a pair of concurrent sessions throughout the day. Most sessions are live, with a few having been pre-recorded, so be sure to engage in a chat or submit questions in real time. There will be short breaks between sessions throughout the day, as well as a full hour break for lunch from 12 to 1. So we will make sure everyone gets a chance to stretch their legs. Of course, we have to thank the sponsors for today's event, which include Comcast NBC Universal and their Lift Labs Accelerator, Ben Franklin Technology Partners, CGI, Flexential, Invest Hong Kong, Morgan Lewis, Neutrality, SAP, Temple University's College of Liberal Arts, University City Science Center, University of Penn and the Penn Center for Innovation, and V Exchange, not V Exchange, V Exchange. Be sure to show them some love during the breaks between sessions, during the lunch hour, or at any point during the day in the expo area. And for some randomized fun, check out the networking area, which will pair you with another attendee for a quick video introduction, about 3 minutes to get to make a new friend. Okay, let's get the party started. At this point, I'd like to bring in my colleague and Technically CEO, Chris Wink, to officially kick off the programming.
Vincent, I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Introduce. Thanks for the shout out. As you're going to see all day, we know the virtual event burned, so get active in the chat. I know the feeling. You're sitting, you got to check some email. You're going to have us in the background sometimes. That's okay. I get that. But shout out in the chat, because it just makes the overall experience a whole lot stronger. I know you're worried about this, but I am gonna share my screen because I want to show you a few things out of reporting from Technically. So don't get too alarmed. Can I get a shout out in the chat? Are we seeing this load? Are these slides up? Give me some love in the chat. I'm aware that there are humans here. I actually can see the numbers, so I know there are humans here. Just make sure that I'm not speaking into a void. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Dean. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, come in. I can see. I literally know that you guys are here. Thank you. Yes, there we go. Thank you, Brooke, Jen. See, it's happening. All right. So it still says loading though for you. Really? All right, good. All right, good. So, all right, thank you. We're here. So thank you for being part of Introduce. Thank you, Juliana. See, I can look at the chat, so we'll see. It's fascinating to see the numbers and see all of your smiling faces. Break out of the habit, get in the chat. I know you're there. So my job here is to give you some sense of what we at Technically, a news organization focused on local tech economies and how companies grow, what we're seeing after a very strange year. And to do that, I want to use the stories of 5 people from the communities we report on. I'm going to pull out some we've reported on and some of their own stories that I think help illustrate a few trends we're seeing in the markets we report on, in addition across the country, post-COVID and the like. But I want to take a brief deviation. Maybe Ryan Frankel will appreciate this. The the dated reference to the University of Chicago, Milton Friedman, the legendary economist, 1970. This is an iconic New York Times Magazine essay that he writes in September 1970. I'm kind of fixated on this. This is a fascination of the business press. I want to see in the chat if any of you have actually ever read this essay, but this is where the concept of shareholder value being maximized comes from. The profit above all else, that the only enduring focus of a business can be on maximizing profit. Though it wasn't a zeitgeist at this point, Milton Friedman is credited with really popularizing the concept in this really legendary essay. And in that essay, which I recommend reading because it's fascinating, he says what I think probably sounds very strange to us now, that any business that is taking seriously eliminating discrimination or even avoiding pollution, that they're pursuing unadulterated socialism. And surprise, Milton Friedman didn't mean socialism in the positive sense that some of you may feel it. He means it in a deeply, deeply negative sense. His point was that businesses will be distracted if they are doing anything other than maximizing profit, that therefore they will become less efficient. Now, that might sound really strange to some of you, but I want to make a connection to something that is a lot more familiar. I would imagine a whole bunch of you are quite familiar with this Basecamp saga. Can I see in the chat, you guys are following this, right? I would have to imagine this is on a whole bunch of people's minds. Basecamp is a deeply influential Chicago-based, though largely remote staffed technology firm. They create the project management tool Basecamp. I imagine there might even be Basecamp users in the room. And Jason Fried, a super influential, really respected CEO, literally one of his books is on my shelf here, wrote back in April, hey, we can't talk about political matters on public work forums anymore, which created a fascinating blowback. Nearly more than a third of his 60-person staff quit in the span of 2 weeks. I don't think we fully grasp how big of a change that is. You guys may have seen that Coinbase, who I'll reference later, did a similar announcement and did have some departure, but far less. Having a third of your staff leave over a matter like this is enormous. You might think the connection I'm making is somewhat strange, but I think Jason, despite having spoken out about Black Lives Matter, despite frequently writing about workplace culture and the sensitivities of team building, and in some sense being seen as a thought leader, I think he lost the same wire that Milton Friedman in the 1970s had not yet recognized was going to happen. And that thing that happened was what we all take for granted. People by the 90s clearly became more important than machines for most of our knowledge companies. The highest margin, our most successful growth stage companies, people by the 90s. And Richard Florida's, this is his iconic creative class reporting and research, that knowledge workers, creative economy workers, outpaced and eventually crossed working class, essentially machine operators, and the like, as a share of a workforce. All of the companies you work at represent that yellow line that Richard Flor was very fixated on. And he noted like that was a fundamental economic change that was taking place. And Darren, I love this, and I see this. I will get back to you. So drop those notes. Keep dropping stuff like that in the chat. I will definitely be responsive. But Darren, I note that. So to walk through why I think Milton, misconstrued or not, Darren, why I think Milton did miss a big point that came later after his era, and what I think Jason at Basecamp got wrong, I think can be illustrated in a few people's stories that we report on pretty commonly. And I want to note, Jessica, that is not that person's real name, and that is not that right photo, because I will be referencing one person who I did not get permission to share a bit. The others are these real sources that we report on. So let me share 5 stories. First, let's talk about Taylor Poindexter. I don't think Taylor's here today. We reported on Taylor for years. She's DC-based back-end engineer. She's a great Twitter follow. We've reported on her for years, and she is a emblematic representation of the celebrity technologist. And we've seen this in a whole bunch of professional classes. No longer do you have to be an organizational leader at the top rank to be one of the most influential people at an organization. That so has helped that, but we are reporting on authoring happening at a variety of professional levels. And average base salary growth of software technologists is finally slowing. That growth was really rapid for the last 20, 25 years. And that's starting to slow. It's still growing, but it's starting to look more like other salary growth. And we're seeing values and stances be what an increasingly in-demand professionals are demanding of their workplaces. We want to know what your stance are on an ever-growing array of issues, which is very challenging, and we'll get to that in a moment. But what we're ultimately seeing this play out is coveted professionals join teams. They don't take jobs. They care a lot about what the workplace is. That came from management site, still deeply influential. And we've seen that grow into increasing growth of employer brand marketing. Now more than a third of that EB marketing budget is on content production. Companies are saying we have to tell our story about the employees who are thriving at our organization because we've lost control. We are not purely one-to-one owning the power dynamic in a hiring process. Taylor, if you're not following on Twitter in the last several months, left a role and is doing a very open, very fascinating, very intentional job search, talking about salary transparency, interview process. She's meaningfully flipping dynamic exactly because she's a relatively approachable back-end engineer, been successful, but is leveraging her audience to really change the dynamics. And I think that is a powerful representation of how people power is flipping the relationship between worker and employee. Let me go to a second example. So this is Jessica, not her real name, not her real photo, but I was having a conversation with a source of ours a few weeks ago now in one of the technically markets, and she said a very interesting thing. Jessica works at a big tech platform, a company that a lot of, if not all of you, know really well. They allow for fully remote staff. She is remote staff. She was able to go from a high cost market to a lower cost market. So she is raising her income. And she said a funny thing that she was going to leave her big tech platform company and she was pursuing employment at a local tech company, a tech company in the city she now resides. Why? Because she wanted to solve problems with people in person. So Office became a hiring advantage for the companies that she's applying for. And I think this matters because I think our fixation right now on the hybrid workplace is going to be very challenging. There's been a handful of reports of late, particularly coming from behavioral psychology, on why hybrid workplaces are challenging. I know this. Those of the technically team will know that for the better part of a decade, we have been a hybrid workplace. We have put reporters in different markets that we report on. We've had one central HQ, and it's challenging to create a single codified culture. I remember a few years ago, a DC hiring manager telling me that after they acquired a company from another city, that the biggest organizational challenge they had was trying to marry organizational culture. And that person told me that that they felt you either had to be all remote or all office. You couldn't do a mix in the middle. Have some team out, some team in office. You couldn't do it. You should get rid of the office or make everyone be in the office. The data show that remote-only firms are still a minority. This is not a massive change. The employee data becomes really clear. 3 and 4 workers, and even when you go to the professional class, this stays above 60 and 70%. Most employees do want some office team time. So I think hybrid models can happen they're just very challenging, and it will really work only for your highest performing and most experienced teammates who are very good at like being fully independent. So remote flexible, the idea that we are mostly in a single office, we have some of our more experienced workers work elsewhere, seems to be a real winning opportunity. And as Jessica seems to point out, it could be a real differentiator for some employers to say, hey, we do have an office for those types of professionals who want to be here. We will be remote flexible for our higher performers. When we do have an existing employee who moves, we don't have to lose them. We can recruit for the right fit. But as I think we're seeing a lot, in 2020, we had a whole bunch of conversations with perhaps somewhat undifferentiated tech firms saying, great, because of COVID, we now can hire from anywhere. Of course, what that also means now is you are competing with every company on the planet for those same professionals. So Amazon, Facebook, Coinbase, Twitch, you are now competing with some of the most highest margin monopolistic companies in the history of humanity. That's now who you're up against, unless you start using your office as a differentiation. So for some companies, the office differentiation is real. We are reporting on some remote only firms. They will exist, but they tend to be for folks who are highest performers. A third story here, Gabe Pendleton, Baltimore, Maryland based. We reported on him for years. I want to share a little bit about his story because he speaks about how some of our lower tier markets can benefit from this moment, but we might be overselling it. So Gabe, great dude. We've known him for 7-8 years. He founded a video gaming website called Baltimore Gamer that we covered. Really active in the Baltimore tech community. He never quite found the home he wanted in Baltimore. I remember having a conversation with him about just that. And then just in March, Twitch, the game streaming giant, hired him on as a manager. He's right now working remotely, still living in Baltimore. But he's now working for one of a dozen most globally successful tech firms. And so what that means for a lot of us is that the landscape is going to continue to change. Each time a big tech platform company at real scale announces that they are fully remote or they're increasingly hiring remote, what that means they can hire from any market. And I think that's seen as more a competition for many firms as opposed to an opportunity. Now, the data show right now, though it's very messy because there's a lot of things going into this. LinkedIn released their new data set. Axios did a great report this past week that built on some of the granular data. And you'll see a lot of them are in Florida, Texas, other Southwest places. The growth is happening in parts of our country where there already is big population growth. Philadelphia actually was a very puzzling and fascinating addition there. It is one of the lower cost centers in the Northeast. Baltimore gets shoved in with DC, although it's a little bit lower cost center than DC, so that's a little bit noisy. But we did see after COVID, professionals migrating to lower cost centers where they could still have their work. When a company like Coinbase announces that they're closing their central HQ, I think the more important story in that was that they did report, and buried in their announcement, that they will be opening a series of smaller offices. Satellite offices has been a phrase that we at Techne have been reporting on in an array of different cities. These idea of small hubs, 10 employees from massive firms that happen to live near each other and use a co-working space or working out of elsewhere. We had technically tried to report out a story about a big tech hub that was happening at a coffee shop, but there was a whole bunch of security concerns. The point is that this can be a real opportunity for lower tier markets. The cities themselves will suddenly have an increasing array of people in home territory that work for the big tech brands. I think you will see more Twitch, Facebook, Google employees in cities around the country, perhaps outside of offices. That could be competitive, though, for our smaller and mid-sized growth companies, particularly early stage companies. So the office may be a differentiation for them. Gabe's opportunity to stay in Baltimore and work at one of the world's most successful companies is a really telling example of that. Fourth of the 5 people stories I wanted to share is McKeever Conwell, also Baltimore based. Forgive my Baltimore bias right now. I think we have to recognize that the Black and brown wealth creation is both a moral opportunity, but also a growth opportunity. And this is actually where I'll begin to float back to our pal Milton Friedman, and I will almost come back to Darren's point in a couple slides here. In slower growth states, most of the Northeast, a good portion of the attendees today are from Northeast states. Most of us are in slow growth states. We are not growing in population very rapidly. Our Latinx community is an exception. And we have massive tech worker shortages. So lack of representation in workforce and the like represents a huge opportunity. So Black and brown professional growth, diversifying technical workforces, wealth creation generally, this is not just a moral imperative. This has to be recognized as an enormous growth opportunity. This is where we are seeing a range of investment funds. Brian Brackeen, who we've reported on, and it's been in a podcast series of ours, opens essentially the largest Black-owned VC fund in the midst of the pandemic. McKeever Conwell, who, full disclosure, I contributed to his fund as an LP. I don't report on him anymore. We handled the ethics of it. But I recognized that both Brian and McKeever's thesis is essentially there's a huge market opportunity being missed. This is where business growth can happen. Set aside the moral imperative. This is where we need to see our economy thrive. And I think this has to be grasped. So if you are more intimidated by the social justice portion of this is a rational business opportunity as well. And this, I think, is a big, again, some of what Milton Friedman's fighting discrimination is a waste of time. Again, Darren, I mean, we're going to talk in the chat afterward. But what I get missed is the massive people opportunity that was being missed because of a lack of investment here. So we technically had done a bunch of reporting. Rather than just nice words, how do you diversify your talent pipeline? It is long and painful building from the beginning, future pipeline building. But it also is workforce development. How is reskilling happening right now? How are existing professionals, McKeever and Brian, both founders who also now have funds, how are opportunities being sped up? Because we are lacking a pipeline for both workforce and business creation in these communities of color. But there's also organizational dynamics. We've done a ton of reporting on firms that have not done the work of building a more inclusive environment, then struggle to be able to ever recruit diversely. Of course, because you probably have some fundamental organizational dynamic challenges. So in the technically hiring port linked there, we have tried to increasingly convey there are opportunities for this to be both business imperative and a social justice issue. And so I think McKeever, who does not talk about it as publicly as a social justice point, but a business opportunity, is pretty profound. And I think something that hiring managers can really care about. The last people story, I think actually, I want to give you a little bit of sneak peek here on a reporting series that we technically are working on. So this is real raw data that I've spent like a little bit of the last 6 months of my life working on with a few folks, using some census snapshot data, the Puma data set, for those of you who are data nerds, to really ask the question of like, who are the high income earners? The $200,000 per individual threshold is what gives an SEC accredited investor, what gives you the ability to be an accredited investor. And the numbers are what you might expect are relatively brutal. This should be seen as an opportunity. DC does really well. I mean, because DC is a relatively expensive place, it has a disproportionately high number of high income earners. There's cost of living represented here. But some of the data are so low that we are not even going to be able to include it. I don't literally think that Baltimore had no Hispanic residents who earned more than $200,000 in 2019. But the number is so low that it's going to prove unspecified. And what this reporting, I think, is beginning to show us is there's a real reason that we're seeing gaps in economic growth across communities, that the numbers are still shockingly low. This is moral imperative and business opportunity. Both are true at the same time. The fifth person story that I wanted to touch on before I wrap us up and send us into our 10 a.m. sessions. I think, and this will bring us back to Jason and Milton at the beginning of our conversation, that serious founders are going to have to give a damn about their communities, and community is going to mean a lot of different things, whether they're hiring by having an office in a place, whether they're going to have to recruit celebrity technologists and take stances on issues, have opinions and beliefs. We're going to see founders need to balance a lot more than they ever have in an already difficult reality. And this is very interesting. Since the 1970s, I've been obsessed with this, as anyone from Technically knows. We were in decades of declining rates of entrepreneurship. People do not typically start companies during recessions. That is not true. Late 80s, the Great Recession, 2008, we did not see big upticks in rates of entrepreneurship. Typically, people hunker down and then later with economic growth return to it. That changed last year. It was another thing that kind of surprised everyone, and economists are still a little bit arguing about why. But something different happened. We have a new crop of founders coming, particularly in high growth companies. They're going to have both their national and global mindset, but they're going to get workforce challenges on them to know what their stance are on a whole number of issues. And suddenly company culture, employee value proposition, these are going to be as foundational to building great companies as your customer value prop is, as your efforts to build sales and marketing, to build product. And I think the central point here on why I think founders are going to have to understand this, in the bottom right, there's a screenshot of a VC that was kind of sniping at the people who are criticizing Basecamp. And he kind of said, like, this is a great place to work. Like, how could this be a problem? And I think the only data point that all of us have to care about is a third of their workforce quit. If you make a decision as a leader and a third of your workforce quits, that there's a hard decision to be made. I believe that Basecamp is gonna hire for those roles. They're at a vaulted position that I do not worry about Basecamp being able to thrive. But I do think this is gonna be something that companies are gonna have to care a lot about. And as we grow tech economies, we're gonna have to care a lot about that as well. And so I think there are a few simple, oversimplified lessons to take from this that we're seeing. Following principles, not rules. I have Jason Fried's book, and I feel like that stance may have broken some of his own principles to set rules that felt most convenient for him. Though, again, we'll get to it out in the chat. I think we have to see founders making good faith investments in people. Growing teams is very difficult. You will not get it right. People will be fired. Teams will have to change. You will have employees who leave and they're wrong fit. No one will get this right perfectly, and no one should expect we will. And reputation management is very challenging because the expectation is basically, do I have to get it right 100% of the time? You can't. But you will have a track record over time of, have we, on the whole, made good faith investments in people? And we technically see again and again in the data that place is going to endure, whether it be a differentiation to have an office or to otherwise have place, or if you go remote or you as an individual worker will look remote, having a community of people that you have proximity to will matter. And I think those are lasting themes that are going to throw us throughout today. And so that's it. We're at time. Thank you guys for being here at Introduced. That is how we're thinking about building better companies. You can now, I'm gonna shut us down here and we'll go into our 10 a.m. sessions. As Vincent said, every session is just 45 minutes. So we do have breaks in between throughout the day, in addition to that noon break. Have a great day. Please get active in the chat, because we all know otherwise you kind of feel like you're just floating in a virtual screen. Drop ideas in chats. We'll see you there. Thanks so much for being here. It's been a pleasure. See you in the chat. Thanks, everybody. Get over to your 10 a.m. sessions.